Despite its heatsink, the Sony A95K delivered slightly lower HDR peak brightness than the Samsung S95B across most window sizes. However, because of how our eyes perceive brightness in a logarithmic manner, the actual difference in real-world viewing was not as drastic as the numbers suggested. Yes, the Samsung S95B still provided the most impactful HDR presentation among OLED televisions we've tested so far, but the Sony A95K came a very close second, since both TVs use the same QD-OLED panel whose high color luminance ensured their bright colors remained adequately saturated, unlike WRGB OLED TVs which have to either darken or desaturate such colors at high brightness. Like all Samsung televisions, the S95B adapts its HDR10 tone curve according to max MDL or mastering display luminance metadata, whereas as is the case on most Sony TVs, the Bravia A95K performs real-time scene analysis when tone mapping. While most HDR scenes would look similar on both QD-OLEDs in spite of different tone mapping philosophies, Samsung's approach is less than ideal in titles such as Tenet, whose max CLL of 349 nits was significantly lower than its 4000 nit max MDL container, causing it to appear darker than the Sony in a number of scenes due to earlier roll-off. Now, although Sony did not utilize the heatsink to push the HDR peak brightness on the A95K, image retention would be cleared away quicker as a result, allowing the Japanese brand to safely forego some anti-screen burn measures without sacrificing OLED lifespan, contributing to a more stable HDR picture that's not hampered by auto-dimming even in game mode. Of course, you can go into the service menu on the Samsung S95B to disable this APL-based auto-dimming, but you will risk voiding your warranty if a technician bothers checking the service log and finds out that you have turned off an inbuilt protective mechanism that's meant to reduce the risk of OLED burn-in. Near black handling on QD-OLED televisions is on the whole more stable than that on WRGB OLEDs, manifesting no near black chrominance overshoot thanks to the absence of white subpixels. Instead, QD-OLED displays such as the Sony A95K and the Samsung S95B are more prone to undershoot artifacts, and between the two TVs being compared here, the Samsung S95B exhibited more black smearing than the Sony A95K, likely because Sony has implemented heavier temporal dithering just above black to mitigate this issue. In either case, the smearing or the dithering weren't as distracting as near-black artifacts observed on WRGB OLEDs. Otherwise, near-black luminance on the Samsung S95B tracked darker than reference, whereas that on the Sony A95K was brighter, requiring substantial adjustments to bring it closer to reference, but this would also exaggerate polarization at certain tones, especially in bit-starved content. Colors were slightly more accurate on the Sony A95K, more so in HDR than in SDR, although most people probably won't know outside of a side-by-side comparison against a reference monitor. Where the Sony pulled ahead decisively was in color space auto-switching when watching HDR movies. The more accurate DCI-P3 setting on the Samsung would introduce some polarization in HDR content mastered to Direct 2020, requiring users to manually switch to PT 2020 for the smoothest gradients, whereas the auto setting on the Sony tracked accurately regardless of the source infraframe color space. Even with all motion settings disabled, both the Samsung S95B and the Sony A95K presented 24 frames per second movies accurately without telesyncing judder. However, due to OLED's near instantaneous pixel response time, which makes the mild stutter inherent in 24p films more apparent, some viewers may choose to engage motion interpolation to smooth out the stutter, and Sony's motion flow was generally less prone to frame skipping and other interpolation artifacts than Samsung's motion-compensated frame interpolation system. Furthermore, should you choose to activate black frame insertion or BFI, Samsung's BFI algorithm would incur visible soap opera effect and interpolation artifacts in 50Hz content due to undefeatable motion interpolation, presumably to mask any frame rate conversion judder introduced by its 60Hz centric BFI implementation. Like on all Samsung televisions, overscan cannot be disabled with a standard definition video signal on the S95B, causing standard def content to look slightly zoomed in and softer than on the Sony A95K, whose overscan can be turned off even in SD resolution. Perhaps this is part of the reason why Samsung felt compelled to crank up the intensity of its dynamic sharpening algorithm, which unfortunately also extended to UHD resolution content that doesn't really need further edge enhancement, as evidenced by the presence of more moire on this Luma zoom plate pattern from the Spears & Mansell UHD HDR benchmark disc. Despite this, the Sony A95K still looked slightly sharper than the Samsung S95B when upscaling high-definition material, be it from terrestrial broadcast or from a high-quality 1080p Blu-ray disc, although owing to dynamic sharpening, both TVs will appear slightly over-processed in high-def scenes containing plenty of fine detail. The Samsung S95B suppressed jaggies better than the Sony A95K in video-based interlaced material, so when scrutinized up close on a paused frame, diagonal lines would be presented with more aliasing on the Sony, though we sincerely doubt anyone will be able to notice this in moving video content from a normal viewing distance. The Sony A95K handled low bitrate content better than the Samsung S95B. In this heavily compressed sequence from Game of Thrones, there's already smoother gradients on the Sony natively. You can also use the smooth gradation setting on the A95K to reduce in-content posterization even further, while the Samsung doesn't offer such a control in its user menu. QD-OLED televisions have been found to deliver better screen uniformity than WRGB OLED televisions, but between our review samples, the Sony A95K appeared to be that bit cleaner in terms of dark homogeneity, making it the most uniform display we've reviewed since the days of plasma. For next-gen gaming, the Samsung S95B is overall the better choice than the Sony A95K, whose MediaTek MT5895 chipset is a bit long in the tooth. The Samsung S95B is equipped with 4 full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 connections for you to hook up multiple HDMI 2.1 source devices, such as a PS5, an Xbox Series X, and a high-end PC with NVIDIA RTX 30 series graphics card, whereas the Sony A95K provides only 2 full bandwidth HDMI inputs, of which one is the eARC port, making it difficult to use multiple HDMI 2.1 source devices without having to plug and unplug, or buying an additional HDMI 2.1 receiver or switcher. Input lag is also lower on the Samsung, both at 60 frames per second and at 120 frames per second with game mode engaged on both QD-OLEDs. In addition, the S95B can unofficially support 4K 144Hz resolution, which admittedly is a niche use case for high-end PC gamers, while the A95K is capped at 4K 120Hz. However, Samsung's always-on dynamic tone mapping in game mode still significantly over-brightens the HDR presentation, resulting in not only more clipping or specular highlight detail than the Sony A95K, but also more posterization in certain HDR scenes because of the EOTF tracking being pushed above the button ramp by Samsung's dynamic tone mapping algorithm. Furthermore, the Sony A95K offers a smooth gradation decontouring filter which can be deployed to smooth out in-game posterization, whereas the Samsung S95B lacks such a control in the user menu. The higher the smooth gradation setting on the A95K, the more fine detail that would be scrubbed away, leading to an overly filtered artificial appearance, so we would advise against going above smooth gradation low on the Sony A95K. The S95B was able to reproduce full 444 chroma with PC mode engaged, while the Sony A95K couldn't do so even in game or graphics mode, which is another gaming attribute that went in favor of the Samsung. Design-wise, the QD-OLED panel on the Samsung S95B was flimsier, whereas the one on the Sony A95K is reinforced to a thicker degree, perhaps necessitated by the presence of a heat dissipation layer. Both these QD-OLEDs sounded above average as far as in-TV speakers were concerned, but after comparing back and forth by muting each TV in turns, we thought the audio quality on the Sony A95K was superior, since it's able to go louder with deeper bass, better tonal balance, and wider soundstage. In terms of smart TV platform, we felt that the Tizen OS on the Samsung S95B was a bit more sluggish than the Google TV interface on the Sony A95K. The Samsung S95B and the Sony A95K are two of the best televisions you can buy in 2022, and these QD-OLEDs will go up against the LG G2 and the Panasonic LZ2000 WRGB OLEDs in our upcoming UK TV shootout event organized in conjunction with UK electrical retailer Compare More, who have also kindly sponsored this video. I have worked with them for more than a year in offering a pre-calibration service. I've personally trained their calibrator David Corner to my own high standards. For an extra fee, he will run in a TV you buy from them, calibrate it and deliver it to you after having the calibration approved by me. Customer feedback has been excellent, so please give Confident More a call if you wish to buy a pre-calibrated television, or even any new TV at a competitive price with excellent customer service. Thanks again for your support. Okay, having evaluated these QD-OLEDs side by side using objective measurements and real-world content, I'm going to make it really easy for you to choose between the Samsung S95B and the Sony A95K. If next-gen gaming is important to you, get the Samsung, which features lower input lag, 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, full 444 chroma, and even up to 4K 144Hz refresh rate. For the outright best value for money, get the Samsung, which is cheaper than the Sony, significantly so in some countries. However, for those of you who are willing to pay the price premium, the Sony is superior to the Samsung in several aspects of picture quality, namely cleaner handling of low bitrate content, a motion interpolation system that's less prone to artifacts, more accurate colors especially in HDR, Dolby Vision support, as well as no APL-based auto-dimming out of the box. Now, before you commit to either the Samsung S95B or the Sony A95K, perhaps you might want to know if QD-OLED is indeed the right display technology for you. I've done a side-by-side comparison of QD-OLED versus WRGB OLED, so go watch the video by clicking here.